If you want to build a merch business that scales long term, it might be in the artist's best interest to partner with not just any company, but a company that is willing to be involved and really give them the time and attention to grow that business.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by IndiePRO.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 312, and we're going to talk about merch and fulfillment and all the good stuff that goes with building an awesome merch brand for your music career. And we've got a really great guest with us today. I'm super excited. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me, as always, is Circa. And today, we're going to welcome our friend, Seamus Menihane, to the podcast. He's from Downright Merch, an amazing merch company that we've had the pleasure of working with at our agency, with a lot of our agency clients. And he's here to drop merch secrets on us. Seamus, welcome to the podcast, dude. Thanks for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. It's Jack, I know we've been working together for a minute, so I'm psyched to be a guest, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
When the idea to have you on the show popped into my head right around Christmas, I was like, I can't believe we didn't do this sooner. And as soon as the holidays rolled by, I think I texted you and I was like, yo, let's get on the phone and just like catch up and please come on the podcast. Like, it would be so much fun just to talk about all of this stuff, because you guys are a powerhouse of an operation. And I think that there's a lot that artists can learn, both from the standpoint of people that are, you know, kind of having a merch operation going on in their basement right now, or their living room, or their garage, and also people that are in a place where it might be time to bring on a team. I think there's a lot to be talked about and a lot to be learned. So I'm so psyched to have you.
Absolutely. And I think to that point, it's still like a lot of it seems maybe a little under the radar, or a little, secretive. I feel like it's not super out in the open, like a lot of the processes and things that like a company like Downright Merch offers. So yeah, it's definitely, beyond just getting together on this and shooting the shit. I think it's cool to, have some more information about, what our company provides and how merch can be a viable business for a brand or an up and coming artist.
For sure. Yeah. Well, let's kick it off with this. I'd love for you to just kind of let our listeners know a little bit about you, how you came up in the industry, what seed was planted in your mind to build this wild business that you're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just a little bit about myself. I grew up playing in bands. I was a touring musician before I started this business. I grew up playing drums and touring in a bunch of different bands, everything from indie to, metal, punk rock. Like, I kind of just always loved playing drums, and from a very young age kind of knew that I wanted to be a touring musician. That's kind of my background. I guess I have a very firsthand understanding of what independent artists need from a merch provider, because I was in that position for so long, and just learning from firsthand experience what worked for my bands and what services were really valuable, and where we could see like improvements in what services we used. It was all really firsthand, practical, lived experience from my end. So yeah, I played in bands from a very young age up until maybe 2016, 2017. And maybe a little bit later than that, like 2017, 2018 is when I kind of cooled off on touring a little bit and really dove into the business side of it, where, when I was in a band and touring, I kind of always was interested on the music business side of it, and just decided that I kind of wanted to explore that more as a long-term career, as opposed to being a hired gun touring drummer, which was kind of my only experience in the industry to that point. I had like worked at screen printing shops before and always been interested in custom apparel and screen printing. So when it came time to kind of make a move and figure out what I wanted to do after being in a band, it just seemed like a really kind of natural progression on my end to try my hand at starting a merch company. That's kind of how the transition from being an artist on the road and having that firsthand experience with working with merch companies and working with, other people in the industry kind of pivoted to me actually being on the other side of that and starting a company from scratch and like kind of building the foundation of what Downright Merch became.
Super cool, man. I would love to know like any stories, like maybe in your origin story somewhere, there's like a frustration or a pain point that you experience with like dealing with merch companies. I know before the show we were talking and you said you were involved in some hardcore metal punk scene type stuff. And, you know, obviously it's very DIY and there's a lot of touring involved as opposed to like strictly being online. So I imagine there's like a lot of merch printing that needs to go on and it's probably most dicey in that intersection. So I'd love to know kind of what inspired you to want to get over that hump.
Yeah, I don't think that there were any specific pain points that I experienced from being in a band where I was like, man, I could do this better. Like I don't think that was really like that wasn't really the way I looked at it. Like we had always worked with some really great merch companies.
It's fortunate.
Yeah, we always worked with great companies that were like really good, like resources to us. And like, I think where I really got exposed to what a merch company actually can provide and like the vast scope of this service was really in like the last bands that I was in, where they had partnered with merch companies as opposed to just having like a screen print, like a local screen printer that was like supplying, the printed goods to sell on tour. Like the last band I was in, it was really cool to get a glimpse of what like a full service merch company, like how valuable it was for our business. Everything from like the online side of it, the e-commerce side of it, being like proactive with like projecting how much merch we would need for specific tours. I really got a glimpse of that in like the last two bands that I was playing for. And I think that really kind of inspired me to say, oh, there's more to this than just like the actual printing and like delivery of merchandise. There's really like an open lane to come in and be like a brand partner with an independent artist, and I knew that those sort of companies existed, and I knew they existed obviously on like a much larger scale, but to see how impactful that could be like for an independent brand or an independent band was really inspiring for me to say, well, beyond just screen printing, there's a whole world of services that a merch company can come in and provide an independent artist. So I wouldn't say it was more like pain points like being on the road and saying like, oh, I could do this better. I think it was more so like just kind of being inspired by seeing what degree of services like these sort of companies offered, and then saying, well, I kind of want to make my own version of it and take the things that I know would work really well, like that firsthand experience from being an artist on the road, and really dive into this like whole new world of e-commerce, which like I feel like at that point with the advent of like Shopify, it was never easier to build an online store from the ground up, and I feel like if anything, seeing that from before, like it seemed like such a big mountain to move with building like an online store. But again, with things like Shopify, it really makes it easy for anybody to jump in and kind of build their own e-commerce brand. So I looked at it, we're like, okay, well, we can supply great merchandise for artists, and we can approach the e-commerce and direct-to-consumer side of it as well. And that was like the two starting pillars of Downright merch. And those are still like the two pillars of what our company provides today. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I formed the initial vision of the company from being an artist into starting.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. I mean, that's really inspiring to hear, man, that like it wasn't so much of like I'm so frustrated with how things are operating. It was more just like, wow, look at the playground of stuff that we can do and the things that I've learned. And I think I could make something really cool and build a business around it and provide an incredibly valuable service. It's a really optimistic point of view. I love that. I think that's really, really cool and very creative. Like as a musician yourself, like we tend to tap into that sort of creative center in our brains. And I feel like you can come at it two ways. It's either like I'm trying to solve a problem, or I'm so inspired by the things around me. And it's kind of that childlike wonder of like, oh, what if I did this? I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah. And the creativity element really translated from being an artist and being in a band to building a business more than I thought. Like just because I had never started a company, I didn't realize that there's like a lot of those like artistic elements that go into building a business and obviously in a brand that kind of tap into the same train of thought that making music does, and being in a band, and I think that a lot of the business side of it comes with being in a band and like managing the relationships of the people in the band and like learning how to build something together. A lot of that was like a natural progression from doing that for years and then taking kind of those like communication skills that you kind of build with just being, grinding it out with your band for years, taking those skills and applying it to a business was also like a big fundamental part of what led us to start the company.
That's super cool.
I was just going to say, I would love to hear kind of like the initial bootstrapping this company. Like, what were some of the early big wins? Was there like particular bands you aligned with? Kind of how did you get the ball rolling when you had this decision to start?
I think the initial big client that we got was my own band. So I played in this band called Vanna for about three or 4 years, and we were working with a merch partner, and I had been working at a screen printing shop before that. And, I kind of convinced them to make the switch to let me try to handle all of our merchandise, which was definitely like more like it looking back at it, it was a lot of work for one guy, especially just figuring out how to make the business run from the jump. Like, we kind of just dove headfirst into building the online store, doing all of the fulfillment out of my bedroom, doing all of the printing, and kind of just like, taking this as like our one flagship client to build the business off of, and it was all like bootstrap from the jump, I'm obviously very thankful that they gave me the opportunity to do that with my own band, because it was a massive learning experience, just like getting into learning how the actual business model operates and learning how to set up a store and learning how to pick and pack orders. Yeah, the first flagship client was my own band. And then from there, it was a lot of relationships that I had with other bands that we had toured with for years and years before. It was a lot of relationships and friends that I called and said, hey, this is my new thing that I'm doing. Like, let me print some t-shirts for you. Let me try to see if there's any value that we can add to your band. So yeah, a lot of it was very organic from the jump. Like I said, first big client was my own band, Vanna. Second big client was this band from Connecticut called Currents, which we still work with today. Almost 6 years later, they're still a huge client for us. And we've been with them from the jump too. Like we were with them when they were a local band, and we've kind of seen their like progression over the years to where they are today. So there's a few clients like that where it was just, natural friendships, relationships with the people that were involved in their band or their business that I had. That was how we won those first crop of deals that kind of formed the business.
That rocks. Like what? Because you had mentioned like picking and packing orders, doing the fulfillment. If we were to break your business down, like what are the different things on the menu? And then what would you say is like the dominant service that people are coming to you for, or like that represents the largest like amount of volume or whatever?
Yeah, you mentioned those two pillars. I'm curious how that kind of all builds into everything Cirque just mentioned, builds into DRM's two pillars and the business that you guys have built off of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that when you boil down what our mission is, it is to manufacture and distribute merchandise on behalf of clients, be it bands, brands, record labels, really anybody that has, any sort of IP that can be optimized through the production and distribution of merchandise. That's really our client base, right? In terms of if you want to get more specific of it, like what the core service offerings of Downright merch are, it's really three things. It's e-commerce, manufacturing and production, and then design, creative, and branding. So those are kind of like the three focal points that comprise this, the suite of services that we offer our clients. And what I find, especially, the past couple of years, is we've really hit our stride with a lot of the e-commerce business. And that kind of branches out from there where, it's not just building a web store for artists. It's setting up the e-commerce infrastructure, handling all of the pick and pack, handling all of the warehousing, all the customer service, the fulfillment, the web design. I kind of bunch that together in our main e-commerce service offering, and that's really been a driving force for our business, especially over the pandemic when touring basically stopped. it forced us to pivot heavily into the e-commerce side of our business and really like sketch out what that service roadmap looks like for artists. We've done it with bands, we've done it with independent brands and clothing companies. We've done it with record labels as well, where, a lot of our flagship clients now are labels, independent record labels that will partner with us. We offer our services for their entire e-commerce business.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the pandemic kind of being the turning point where e-commerce kind of rapidly came over the horizon, because we saw so much of the same, especially at the agency here, where a lot of all of a sudden we saw an influx of people being like, I can't tour, I need to sell this merch. I mean, we even have had clients where they came to us to run launches, like digital launches, e-commerce launches around merch that they couldn't sell on tour because the tours were canceled.
Yeah.
So we saw a very similar progression here of adoption to e-commerce and digital in a new and very fast way right around 2020.
That was all of February, March, April, May of 2020. That was our business. It was bands coming to us saying, hey, our biggest revenue stream is done for the foreseeable future. How do we stay alive here? How do we keep pushing forward? And really the only viable option was to pivot that energy into e-commerce, which forced us to, like, on a larger scale, do the exact same. It forced us to really get a system together that worked to scale. And I think that we were forced to do it, because our business before, we were working with a lot of clients that we were providing the tour merch. And then when touring shut down, it was all e-commerce for that first half of 2020. Maybe towards the summer and later half of that year, we saw a lot of bands that were doing like these live stream events and, and like digital, like VIP meet and greets. But at the end of the day, that's kind of like an e-commerce service offering. You know what I mean? So it's still very much in line with the system that we built to kind of facilitate those sort of things as well. And that was our business 2020, 2021. And I think, we really started seeing the tour side of the business pop back up, maybe the beginning of 2022, later half of 2021, early 2022.
That's cool that you got that resistance to like our business is built off, like, especially our agency side is built off of this premise that, like, I think artists woefully underestimate how big the merch can be as a portion of their total business. And certainly during the pandemic, like, that became very apparent to them that it needs to be bigger. But as it like expands back out to touring, like, obviously we help people with ticket sales and stuff, but that's kind of like one of our, I guess, big theses that, like, we champion is that, like, you should be selling more merch. Like, if you're big, you should be selling more merch. And it's interesting to hear that, like, because you had described like e-commerce is this one of these three legs that you had described, but within that, folded within that, is third-party logistics, is warehousing, picking and packing, fulfillment. That's like a whole company. It's like a whole company will be dedicated to 3PL. And that's just like one part of your e-commerce offering. It's interesting.
It is. It's a massive part of our business. Also, like, by just scale and footprint, it's the biggest side of our business, where we have, close to 90,000 square feet of our total footprint here at our facility in Methuen. And a lot of that is pallets and racks of merchandise. And it's like, yeah, not only do we have to figure out how to make these web stores run, but we had to figure out how to deliver on the product. And like you said, like, kind of build like our own like 3PL, but make that like work specifically for our business model, which is servicing bands and record labels. So it is like kind of not a traditional take on what third-party logistics usually look like. And when we like meet and talk with companies that provide similar services, they're like almost taken back by how we're doing it, because it is so different to what that industry typically functions.
Love to hear you talk more about that. Like, not to throw stones at what's going on in the industry, but I know the way that Downright Merch operates is different. And the service that you guys provide is different from what's out there and from what's often offered to artists. So again, like, not that we want to sit here and throw stones at anybody, but like, I'd love to hear you talk about what you guys built and why you build it to be that way.
Sure. I definitely don't want to throw stones, because at the end of the day, it's a hard business. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of moving parts, and it's really I mean, just like any business, it's really hard to make the whole thing flow in one cohesive manner. So, I think it's just it was a lot of trial and error to get our warehousing abilities up to par with what our total e-commerce output was. It's like we were almost working backwards, where we had all these orders. We had no choice but to establish these web stores for our clients, because that was the shift in the industry. And then we had to work backwards to figure out how to build an actual warehouse, how to staff it, how to implement a warehouse management system, how to, again, kind of operate like a 3PL, but have that top level of orders flowing in a different way that 3PLs typically operate. So I guess if I could break that down even further, it's almost like our warehouse, like Downright Merch is like our main client for our warehouse, and it's like the orders are flowing from Downright Merch. And on the back end of that, we have this, very like expansive warehouse operation that is built to be able to deliver on those e-commerce orders.
So really an artist like comes to you, like, I imagine there's some degree of like artists are like, I need this, I don't need that. But broad majority of artists, like, you're just kind of saying like, okay, we're going to handle everything, right? Like design, manufacturing, setting up your web store. And then when you get orders, making sure they get fulfilled. And then even dealing with like, if you have an irate customer or something goes wrong, like you deal with that as well.
Yeah, that's kind of the full suite of services that we offer is offering that all-inclusive one-stop shop for all of an artist's merch needs from beginning to end, and we have a lot of clients that kind of, will choose to use the service in like kind of like an a la carte way, where like we'll do a lot of the, the tour merch printing and fulfillment for them. And we'll do some of the digital marketing for them. But the vast majority of clients are using that full 360 scope and kind of tapping into all service lines that we offer.
What's the kind of, if you were to give like a size of artists that you service, like, your target market, like what's the minimum and even maximum, if there is one, like?
Yeah, I think the way that we kind of built our service was that it really could be effective and impactful for small bands, and that's where we see a lot of the print on demand methods that we've rolled out over the past couple of years is really targeted for some small artists that just don't have the ability to either invest in inventory from the jump, or just, selling a relatively low volume, where print on demand is more of a viable option than investing in a bunch of inventory that's going to live on the shelf. I do think that as we evolve, though, we've identified kind of like what the sweet spot for our ideal client profile is, because obviously there needs to be an audience to sell to, and there needs to be a fan base to prop up the service that we offer. You know what I mean? In terms of like exact metrics that we kind of use, it's tough to nail it down.
Yeah,
it really is, because and beyond that, it's tough to nail it down because there's so many bands that we work with where maybe like the numbers and the total output like are less than another client, but I just love the band and like I want to work with them because I like their music, or they have a team of people that are working with them that we really like working with. So it's definitely not as rigid where we say, oh, you need to be selling X amount, you need to be doing this much in traffic on your store. It's a little more fluid than that, but there obviously needs to be an audience from the jump. That's like the pre-qualifier is, if you have a fan base and a demand for merchandise, we got you covered.
One thing that we've experienced, like, we advise a lot of independent artists, and a lot of them like really want to go right to print on demand through one of the big print on demand, fulfillers. And what we kind of say is that, like, look, like, your quality is going to be less. Shirts are going to smell like vinegar. You're going to completely remove your ability to personalize the fulfillment experience. There's a whole lot of downsides here. And then your margins are just completely cut. For product testing, we'll say like, yeah, go, use print on demand to test out designs at a low volume. But once you're ready, like, you really should go with inventory. Kind of what I would love to know is, were these any considerations when you decided to implement a print on demand? How does it work? What's the quality difference between print on demand and like going with a full stock? Kind of like explain that for me.
Sure. And I think print on demand in and of itself, like that is a fast growing industry, and it's relatively new. I feel like, especially in the context of what we use it for with like the Shopify ecosystem, it's still fairly new. And I can even see from like 2018, 2019 to now, it's like there's been massive improvements and leaps forward with that, with that business as a whole. And I agree with you, using it to kind of prototype designs is definitely a viable method. Some of the bigger companies and players in the space, the service offering that they provide has just changed so much over the years. Some of it's really good and some of it, isn't so good. But I think it's just a matter of like being really clear with the clients in terms of like, the data and like the projections with what they would make per shirt. Cause sometimes that's tough to like kind of wrap your head around. There's a lot of numbers flying around, and it's like, we just try to be as clear as possible on paper is the best option for them in their business, whether that is print on demand or investing in inventory, because there is a threshold where it becomes, like you said, it becomes more profitable, and it becomes more profitable with investing in stock. But sometimes it's just the bands just don't have, it's just not a viable option for them at that point to invest in inventory, which I like to think that we provide a service that makes it a reasonable investment at a good price. But what it comes down to is sometimes print on demand just is the only viable method for an artist, because there's no upfront capital to invest in inventory. So that's when print on demand becomes more of a viable option for their business.
Is print on demand like, or just speaking to your facility, like, is it D2G, whereas like inventorying is more screen printing, or what's kind of the difference there at a technical level?
Yeah, so print on demand is all digitally printed, and inventory that we hold is all screen printed.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. That's good to know. Have you seen that yourself in your business? Like, has the print on demand segment grown with the industry?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's grown because it's a lot more well known from artists, because there are massive companies now that make it very easy for a new user to sign up, subscribe to their platform, and boom, 15 minutes, you have a shirt up on your store and it's selling. So just because it's become so easy to implement that as a viable option, I feel like just a lot of clients are more aware of that option. So we do have a lot of people that will come to us and ask for print on demand, just because that, the relevance of that in the market has increased so much over the past few years. But I feel like a big benefit of having that inventory on the shelf, as we call it, the big benefit to that is typically for a lot of our clients, we're handling both the tour business and the e-commerce business. So having the flexibility to pull inventory from your web store and send it out on the road, and vice versa, right? Having supply that you're selling on the road be processed back to your e-commerce inventory is very beneficial. And you kind of take that option out when you commit exclusively to working with a print on demand provider. So for a lot of the artists, because we're handling both facets of their business, it just makes sense on a business level to have that active inventory investment and have that available to be flexible with.
Do you see any difference from a customer like satisfaction score perspective or in customer service between print on demand and inventory?
Yes, I do, but it's twofold. I think that, yes, sometimes the quality can be subpar because you're not directly involved with manufacturing it. So sometimes it can, for a lot of the big print on demand providers, you can lose that direct quality oversight that you have when you're physically, like when we're printing the t-shirts in house, and we have, a quality control process to ensure that the inventory is what the artists want to represent.
You can take your time.
Yeah, exactly. You can take your time, and a lot of the bigger companies providing print on demand just turn it out so quickly that there's kind of a lack of oversight sometimes with the actual product that's going out. But the ease of use too, with having a product go up for sale and having it manufactured, boom, on the spot, shipped out, obviously that gives a great customer experience. So in that regard, I do see a lot of the customers or the end users are happy with that model. It's kind of a double-edged sword in that regard.
Yeah, that's interesting. A bit of a seesaw.
Yes.
Yeah. To us, like, such a missed opportunity that we like pretty out the gate advise indies is that, like, especially now while you're at a small level, you can put in the time to personalize the fulfillment experience and make it more exciting. It doesn't just have to be a product in a package. Are there any cool stories of like ways that bands have chosen to fulfill, or things they've thrown in with packages, or things they've done with tags, or anything like that like stands out to you in your memory?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really where the fulfillment offering that we provide as a 3PL really is tailored to our client base. For instance, we've had, just one off the top of my head, Owl City did this really cool handwritten notes that they did with all of their orders for a record that they did, that we got the handwritten notes and put them in every single order. And that's just such a, cool, just a value add for the customers to get this like one of one handwritten note that we facilitated picking and putting in every single order. That's an example where we want to do that, because that really does increase the product to the customer, and it's mutually beneficial between us and the artist to take on a project like that. So I don't know how that would work, with another, with maybe more a traditional 3PL, where obviously they would bill for that added, whether it's 50 cents an order or whatever, they'd bill for the added insert. But a lot of those corner cases and kind of tailored projects, we want to be creative with our partners when it comes down to those sort of initiatives, because we look at it as like a massive value add for both parties, for us and the artists. So that's kind of a way where our fulfillment side of our business is really catered to artists, and it's really artist friendly, where, it might not be so artist friendly if you were to just go to a massive 3PL to do a project like that.
You and I have talked off the record, Seamus, about like Downright's model of partnering with artists and brands versus some of the merch deals that are out there in the wild that are basically just like, we're going to buy your IP and own it and then market it and you get a royalty, basically. I'm curious what led you guys down that path when building the business to go the direction that you did versus that option.
It was the only option because I didn't have any money to actually buy anybody's rights. So let's just get that out of the way.
Totally.
And we'd probably be in a different place if I did, and we could have like had some of those deals to begin with. The business would have started completely differently. But it's like, to be honest, I didn't even know that was that was like an option, And it's just like, when we started, we're like, we're going to partner and provide these services, and we're all going to come up with the success of the store, And I think that like inherent partnership is really what sets independent companies like us apart. Now, obviously our client base is like typically geared towards like mid-level bands, but having an active partner is really what facilitates long-term future growth for their merch business. Whereas like maybe if they did a deal where they just signed over all the rights to a big company that they have full control and little impact to their merch business, maybe it wouldn't have so much future growth potential. Like maybe they'd be with a company that didn't really weren't in the position where they really looked at them like as partners. So yeah, I think that's definitely like, that's a fundamental part of how we operate, is that we really come in and we're decisive with what clients we take on. And we really strike a partnership from the jump where we're both invested in future growth. And that's not to say that some of those bigger deals don't have those aspects to it, because obviously if you're putting your money down for an investment for an artist's rights to sell their merch, you're banking on it growing in the future. But you kind of lose that active participation with the artist when you do that, because their means of profiting off of the partnership is the success of the partnership,
I think you lucked out. I think it's such a better arrangement. Like, and we've seen like, these are your competitors to a degree. And I don't want to, force you into being associated with this view. The way I see it, like, we've dealt with a lot of merch companies where that's the model, where they're like, you make a deal with us, you don't have to worry about merch anymore. We'll take it from here, baby. And it's like, it's so much of exactly what artists are kind of en masse migrating from in the record deal world. It's just like kind of a rehash of that, where it's like, clearly you don't have the wherewithal to vertically integrate merchandise, so we're going to take it for pennies on like what we know it's worth. And then sort of like the motivation on those companies' behalf to do the really interesting work isn't really there. And we've just seen sort of a lackluster effort from those types of companies, where it's really cool to see a company that partners at the ground level. And I think that it seems to be an inevitability that eventually that will be the dominant model, where like, vertical integration seems like eventually inevitable, right? Like, because like eventually these artists are going to realize like that there's money to be made here, and there's probably perform way better if you're actually invested as an artist.
Sure. And we have a handful of clients that have come from those sorts of all-encompassing deals where they have little involvement and little say in what the actual output is. And they're more times than not more confident partnering with a company that is completely invested in the actual future growth on like a service level, so it is interesting to see some of those deals come in where it's like maybe that was the way that their merch business was being run before, but it is kind of like a dynamic shift when you partner with an independent company like ours that that is probably a little more involved in serving your business.
I've got a bit of a twofold question for you that I've been sort of dying to pick your brain about. Heading up a company where you are on the ground level of merch with so many different artists and bands, what do you think, out in the wild for artists that are getting into merch for the first time or getting into fulfillment, doing their own fulfillment? What do you think are some of the things that they miss when it comes to merch, when it comes to selling, when it comes to fulfilling upon a great product and creating a great customer experience? What do artists out there miss, or what's miseducated? And as a follow-up to that, for artists that are coming to Downright merch from a place of doing it in-house for a long time, how do you guys preserve the customer experience that they've created? I imagine that that's a feat in and of itself.
Sure. I think the way that we preserve the customer experience is for a lot of our clients, we are setting up their e-commerce ecosystem as like a white label entity where a band will come in and we'll create a Shopify store for them and a customer experience that really puts the artist in the center of it, where for a lot of artists, we have white label customer service. We have, a standalone website where the fans are going directly to, as an example, owlcity.com. And it really offers a different level of engagement with the customer because they feel, because they are buying directly from the artist that they love. So it just connects the artist and the fan on a deeper level. I've seen a big shift in the way that the merch business runs, where because of things like Shopify, that is a viable option now. And it's never been easier to build your own custom web store, right? So maybe, 10, 15 years ago, the process and the lift of having, your own white label marketplace was probably a sizable investment. Like you probably have to get like a development team, like a software. I don't even know. You probably have to spend a lot of money to build that infrastructure.
Payment processing alone.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you kind of have to make your own web business to do that, your own website built from the ground up. And it's never been easier to use a service like Shopify to build those custom white label web store platforms for artists. So I think that because we took a direct initiative to have that as a service that we offer clients and be able to build these like white label web stores, it really brings the artist and the fan closer. And they are going to, I'll use the example again, owlcity.com, and they're buying directly from the artist. And beyond that, we're doing initiatives like the handwritten notes where it brings the connection between fan and artist so much closer through merchandise. So I think taking that approach is definitely value add for artists of any size. In terms of things that they might be missing, you mean like missing if they choose to do their own merch business and not partner with a company like ours?
Yeah, just generally like bands that are starting out and are doing it out of their basement, or artists that are just starting to get their feet wet with anything merch related. There's so much misinformation out there in the music industry about all sorts of things, merch and fulfillment included. So what are some things that people miss or just don't know about that you're like, man, everybody needs to know about this?
Sure. Well, first, I don't want to knock any band that's doing their own fulfillment out of their garage, because that's literally how we started. You know what I mean? And that's like, and there's a lot of bands that we talk to that will pitch the idea of doing something, and it's just like a part of their business that they when they're home from tour, they want to focus on their web store to keep busy and fulfill orders. And I go, love it. Like that's great. We don't want to come in and try to take that away. But I think that it really, to really dial in on it, I think that it's the level of service that we're able to offer at scale. It's probably better than what you're able to offer if you're just one guy doing it out of the basement, And I think it ultimately gives a better customer experience, and some of the things that we're able to do, like making those white label web stores, it's still creates like some direct connectivity between artist and fan. But I think that I'm a big advocate on saying, what are you great at? Probably great at being an artist, and being at writing songs, at touring, at performing. That's probably what you're great at. And it's like, you should be pot committed to that. You shouldn't have to worry about figuring out how to make your own warehouse to fulfill your orders, not to dog anybody, but it's like, you're probably not great at it because it's a really hard business to do, and it's like, I think just at scale, the service that we're able to provide the customers, it's usually beneficial for an artist to kind of pass that task over to a company like ours that's still like really dedicated and involved in their business. But, it's just not what their core strength is as an artist. You know what I mean? It's like, it's probably not printing shirts or running a fulfillment company, and there's probably some sacrifice of quality or service level that the fans are experiencing with keeping that in-house, where if you find the right partner, you can still be really actively engaged and involved in that business, and you can offload some of the things that you might not excel at.
I think that's actually a really good point. Like, there is an inherent bottleneck in the business for an artist when it comes to both product and fulfillment of that product, that at a certain scale, they're going to meet a ceiling that they can't get past. And you might not see it at a low level, but as you grow, eventually you're going to see it. And only someone like you could pass on that kind of advice because you see it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like it is really just being able to allocate your time and your energy into doing the things that make you a great artist and writing great songs and touring, and it's like, maybe merch is one of those things. You don't have to have direct control over the actual service process of it. I think that's maybe more of a practical answer. Again, I don't want to knock anybody that wants to do it themselves or ship their own orders from their garage or whatever. But, it kind of comes down to, if you want to build a merch business that scales long term, it might be in the artist's best interest to partner with not just any company, but a company that is willing to be involved and really give them the time and attention to grow that business.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I love that. I think there's a lot of things in an artist business that could be and probably should be approached like that. Like, you can be the genius with 1,000 arms, but should you be,
Absolutely. There's a really good book that a good friend of mine gave me called Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Good to Great. Such a good book.
Yeah. And it honestly changed the way that I kind of look at the business and saying, like, I want to focus on the things that we have the ability to be great at, and it's like, and kind of not ignore, but not put the central focus on things that kind of take away from that core mission. And I think that train of thought is in line with what I had said about, like, maybe, the artist should focus on being a great artist, and maybe some of those other ancillary things might be getting in the way of that. Who knows? It could be something that's, a distraction from making great art, like trying to build a web store or ship out orders,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can speak to my experience working with Downright merch on this, even when it comes to artists and their teams, where the level of service or just the ability to communicate, had it not been for your team in instances where we were working together, I wouldn't have gotten the answers that I needed, or I wouldn't be able to ship a marketing campaign because I was, being delegated past boatloads of managers and record label marketers and things like that. But having the core team that you guys have to be able to move fast and communicate on the things that we needed to get done, it all of a sudden opened up a bottleneck that, most people would think is just the norm in the industry, when it really doesn't have to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys have the Good to Great economic engine, the profit per X, cash flow per X? Like, they told you to make a KPI that defines your business?
Yeah. That's kind of like, the whole idea of that book, and focusing on like a small core metrics and KPIs that you have the ability to control and change. We've definitely implemented a lot of those ideas in how we actually run the business, and how, like, the really, like, the leadership team at Downright Merch, how we run the business and what we focus on a week to week basis, getting really specific and granular with the things that we want to be great at.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that having that backing to the business alone is a vote of confidence. Great model. I've always been very impressed by not necessarily musically, but culturally and from an e-commerce perspective with Insane Clown Posse.
Me too.
Do you know about their merch operations? It's nuts. So before Shopify, before all of this stuff, they did what you said was nigh impossible. They built their own web store, and not just a t-shirt and some stuff. They had like 50 different jerseys, like all this stuff. Are there any like outfits you see that like sort of approach that level of consideration with merch? Like, because to me, that's like the gold standard. Them and Misfits has been like insane to watch growing up.
I would say that Insane Clown Posse is probably the gold standard.
Right. Yeah.
Like we were talking about before, like I worked at a venue for years and they would come through once a year, and seeing their merch process and how much went into it was pretty damn impressive. So yeah, I really have, and insane. I've kind of like always been really interested, just them as like a cultural and business like entity, I think is pretty impressive. I don't know about the music.
Yeah.
Like just they're like, their business as a whole is like, is pretty wild.
It's not, I tell people all the time, like study Insane Clown Posse, because it's not just having a bunch of merch and having all these designs. It's also how that's integrated into the foundational story of your art. They had like this series of albums that's all has like a branded character on it. And then each of those branded characters becomes a line that's a mile deep of merch. And just like it seems to be like their music and their founding mythos was created to sell merch almost. Like so much goes into it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's like, it's a massive brand. Music is one element to it. You know what I mean? And it's like, it is really interesting. I would say that the way that, you know, their merch business operates, and a lot of bands in that sort of like category, the way that their merch business operates is pretty fascinating. And just as like a fan of merchandise, and like as somebody that is just really interested in like the business behind it, like there are a few clients that come to mind with like, you know, being like great examples of how it's done at the top level. I think Rolling Stones is another one where just what they're doing now in 2024 with merchandise is pretty incredible. There's a few that come to mind.
T Swift as well is pretty remarkable. Managed to sell the same album 4 times.
Yeah.
Just a tweak to merch design. And then Misfits too.
Yeah.
Have always been super impressive.
Same with Slayer. Slayer's like another one that I've always...
Slayer's wild. Iron Maiden
is
another one. It seems to be rock and rock adjacent has that culture of like where merchandise is like a big part of the whole experience.
Dude, how do we forget Kiss? They're like the biggest...
Oh my God.
Like the biggest example of that, you know?
That's probably what inspired Insane Clown Posse. Like,
oh, dude, you're right. We just unlocked something there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an impressive operation. I wonder why this focus, especially from the fans' perspective, on merchandise doesn't spill over in the way that it does to those genres over to like hip hop and pop as much. Or it's like more rare, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I feel like there are a lot of, I don't know if it's genre specific or if it's just the brand that's built as a whole, you know, because even like, you know, Insane Clown Posse is like, I guess you could call it like hip hop, right? I don't know. I haven't listened to them in a while. But...
yeah, it's like horrorcore. It's like, you know, it's more rock adjacent than it is rap adjacent, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's almost like removed from the actual music output itself, and it actually comes down to like the fundamental brand that started with the artist, you know. And if that was a focal point from the jump, then you're kind of setting yourself up for real longevity with your brand's merchandise output, you know?
Yeah, like maybe it's a second order derivative. Maybe it's like, well, rock acts tend to have more persistent logos, right? Like a pop act will change their logo every tour and album, but a rock act, it's like everyone remembers that logo.
I feel like that's still prevalent too with like mid-level, like even like heavy bands, like hardcore metal bands, metalcore bands now. It's still like, I see it in comparison to a lot of like the pop or like more mainstream acts that have a larger social presence, have more streams on Spotify, or on paper a bigger band, but are just like blown out of the water in merch sales with like, you know, smaller you know, metal bands, you know. So I don't know if it's more of that like direct fan access where they feel more connected to some just like normal guys playing the guitar, you know what I mean? Where maybe they feel a little more connected, and that lends itself to more of a prevalent merch business. But yeah, I definitely see it firsthand where I feel like the size of an artist is not a direct correlation to their overall merchandise business or their merch output.
100%. We tend to presume that the larger an artist is that we're talking to or working with, the more awful their merchandise, like maximization of the opportunity is.
Yeah. You know, not to paint with broad strokes either, but coming back to the comparison between rock and rock adjacent and more pop, especially today, like if you look at the merch created by the vast majority of pop artists, if you go out to a pop tour, it's kind of lame. Like, again, I'm not trying to paint with broad strokes, but a lot of times it's just the album cover or a photo from the album that's currently being cycled and the logo, and kind of it. And it's like, all right, I could see why this doesn't sell super well, or why people don't feel like this is part of a culture, really.
I think a lot of that is probably because some of those artists, merchandise wasn't a fundamental element to like building their business. That's what it comes down to, is like the merchandise element is the bread and butter for any small and mid-level band. And that's where you establish those like long-term customers, you know, and then it kind of just becomes a focal point to the artist as a whole, I feel like. But there's some good examples of like hip hop and pop acts now that I feel like are doing really cool stuff on the merchandise side. Freddie Gibbs is a good example of like a hip hop artist that's like developed a really cool merch brand. Pusha T is another artist that I feel like the merch is always on point.
One weird one is Kanye West.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like, I mean, maybe that's the divide, is that like you have more comic booky, like, you know, social outcast types in certain genres and more popular kids wearing designer brands in certain genres. And the chasm to get to merch is like, I'm not going to design a Tommy Hilfiger line, but then like Kanye did it, you know?
Yeah. Oh, you know, Travis Scott is another one. He's had some pretty cool merch.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. So I don't think it's genre specific. You know, I think it's just a matter of building the brand with merchandise being at the core, you know what I mean? And having that as like a core pillar of the brand to begin with.
Super interesting. A few more conversations like this and we'll completely crack the divide.
I don't think we'll ever figure it out. I don't think there's any formula that will translate to, oh, you know how well a band is going to do merch wise. It's all still, I don't want to say trial and error, but it's like, you never really know, you know, and all we can do is kind of commit to trying to build, you know, a long-term sustainable brand in a partnership with our artists.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, this was so much fun. I appreciate you taking the time to shoot the shit with us and talk about all the cool stuff that you guys are doing over there at Downright Merch. Where can our indies keep up with you and what you're doing in the company and get in touch if they think it might be a good fit to work together?
Downrightmerch.com. That's the best way to see all the news and artists that we're working with on socials, Downright Merch. And yeah, it's the best way to get in touch with us is right through our website, downrightmerch.com.
Rock and roll.
Thank you guys for having me. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So much fun. We don't get to talk about this topic really. I say this a lot of times on the podcast, but like truly, we don't get to talk about merch and fulfillment and operation enough on the show. I was so psyched. I've been like just buzzing to have this conversation since we talked about it. So I'm so glad we made it happen. Thank you so much.
It's such a niche market, I feel like, but it is interesting, you know, and it's like, I'm sure there will be some merch nerds that find this interesting.
That's all, because like our whole ethos is like sell more merch. Like merch is the opportunity. Merch is the money that's not being collected in the music industry. So now you've got an ally.
We're gonna make this mandatory listening for all of our clients at the agency.
Yeah.
I back that. I think it's good information to have right from the jump.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, dude. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Seamus is the man and Downright Merch rocks. So this was a blast. We'll have to do another one of these soon. But until then, we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Peace out, Indy.
Can y'all really feel us? East Coast, feel us, West Coast.